NFL Strategy Show. It's Thursday, October 17th. Game by game breakdown with Dave Loughran and Sal Vetri. My, you are lucky. We're glad to have you with us. Of course, thanks for tuning in. Before we get started, I think we all should, I should let all of you know that the NFL 250K baller, $25,000 to first, is at Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports this weekend. And you can get up to $30 in Yahoo Sports rewards points simply by signing up with us at awesemo.com. Go to awesemo.com, AWESEMO. Go to the NFL tab and click articles. These will be free. And if you check out the article right at the top, NFL Primetime Game Showdown Week 7, right there, right on the right at the top of the landing page, click on that and you will see the Yahoo link to sign up. Get your Yahoo Sports Rewards points, those YSRPs, upon depositing, and get started off on the right foot at Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports. They've also got some no management fee contests where everything that you pay into the contest gets paid back out to the player. And if you're working with a smaller bankroll, of course, they've got some great tournaments where you actually have a legitimate shot of winning them, $4,000 or $5,000 to first. Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports, sponsor of the NFL Strategy Show. Remember, click that link, take you from the landing page at awesemo.com on the NFL tab, and click the Yahoo link. When you sign up, get your $30 in YSRPs. All right, Sal, how we feeling, man?
Good. Feeling good, man. Yeah, ready to get into it. The last 2 days I've been doing some of the NBA preseason stuff, and that's just scratching that itch a little bit. So getting through to the weekend, excited to talk about this slate.
Man, NFL preseason stuff I'm all right with, but NBA preseason stuff. That summer league shit, though, I can't.
Oh, yeah.
It's brutal. It's just brutal. I mean, you're guessing on a guy that will never play probably in the NBA ever, how many minutes he's going to get. And you know what I don't like about it? I don't like researching sports where I'm just looking up what beat writers have to say. At least with basketball in the preseason, especially around this time, a lot of the guys are actually getting the minutes. The starters are actually playing, and you have a good idea of whether or not the matchup is good or not from your research. But with Summer League and NFL preseason stuff, you're just paying attention to what beat writers saying. Ain't nobody got time for that.
Yeah. The NBA preseason, not to go too much into it, but yeah, it seems like there's obviously less worries about injuries as the NFL. So compared to the NFL preseason, it's, I would say for the people, if you want to play tonight's slate or whatever, it's just much easier to kind of research and have something behind it other than, beat writers' reports.
Yeah, we got Fast Eddie Fear behind paywall at awesemo.com doing some NBA preseason streams as well if you want to check that out. Let's dive into it. 11 games to get to, starting with Washington at home hosting the San Francisco Giants. Giants are big favorites in this game. The defense has looked legitimate. I buy into it. Whether you do or not is unimportant because they're facing Washington. So even if you make the argument that they've had an easy schedule, well, it's not going to get any harder in week 7. They're opened at 9.5. Now they're 10-point favorites. They have a 25.5 total, 15.5 for Washington, and a 41 over/under in this game. I mean, really the biggest thing about San Francisco right now, Sal, is how often are they going to look to run the ball? And we've seen it consistently all season long. There is not a team in the league that is running the ball more than San Francisco. They've had a lot of success with it. They're averaging a whopping 39 attempts per game. That's more than Lamar Jackson's Ravens. And they're averaging solid enough numbers, but really they're just pounding the rock on the ground. Now that Coleman's back, they can do that more so. Matt Breida, get Mostert involved a little bit. So the question is, do you have any interest in this run game? And if not, is there any reason to look to the pass?
Yeah, so starting with the run game question, if anything, it's Tevin Coleman. We've seen now 2 weeks. 2 weeks ago, he came back, played 34% of the snaps, but was still the majority leader in terms of touches on the ground. Last week, he takes on sort of a majority role overall of 55% of the snaps, and they're slowly becoming a just two-headed backfield instead of three. Most start roaming around for around 12 to 15% of the snaps last week. That being said, though, and we're going to talk about other players in that 5K range on the slate, not too much interest in getting to Tevin Coleman, not much interest in Breida. His snaps and touches overall are coming down, but the price point hasn't come down all that much relative to how his production is going down. Still using the passing game. But overall, Tevin Coleman, somebody who's right now a question mark and really like a maybe, but not a priority at all. on my sheets. And then the passing game, you mentioned it. They're running 10 more times per game than Jimmy G's throwing. He's throwing 29 times per game. And this is just a game script that sets up for both these running backs to touch the ball 12 plus times each. Maybe Mostert gets in there for 5 to 6 carries. It's not a spot that I feel comfortable going to Jimmy G. The only spot that I can kind of touch on 2 places, George Kittle. We're going to get into the tight end position. It's pretty deep. But even if you have Jimmy G throwing 28 times in this game, more than likely based on his target share, 26% on this team, he's probably going to see 6, 7, 8 targets. So that seems okay if you want to pay for it. And then I will say Dante Pettis is coming up in terms of snap share and just usage. And it seems like Deebo Samuel is going to be trending towards questionable for this weekend, did not practice Wednesday. So overall, Kittle is probably the guy you get to the most. And then just not much interest everywhere else, especially on the price points on the running backs.
Yeah, it's funny too, because I think Kittle is perfectly fine here, and you could see a big performance, especially given that this team has been really unwilling to get any specific wide receiver involved to a large extent, really spreading the ball around, which, is fine for real football. But as far as we talk about actual fantasy purposes, it hasn't been great. I'd mentioned before last week's game that they had targeted Garoppolo had targeted a single receiver more than 5 times only once on the season, and a receiver 5 or more times only twice. Which, you take 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 receivers that have gotten any targets, and then you look at through 5 weeks. So a lot of opportunities to see that, but it didn't happen. Last week, Deebo Samuel saw 5 targets. Dante Pettis saw 6. So, there is the potential that you start to see maybe Jimmy Garoppolo start to begin to find more chemistry or favor a certain receiver more. And we know that Deebo Samuel didn't practice yesterday with that groin. I still think it's tough to get there. If it were to be anyone at wide receiver, assuming Samuel is out, Pettis could be an interesting tournament play. And the problem with Kittle is I again, could see him putting up solid numbers, but do you, assuming Evan Ingram plays, and I think he will, he's been a full participant in practice, do you prioritize Kittle over Ingram, or do you prioritize him over a much cheaper Hooper or Darren Waller? Like, where does he fall into the hierarchy of tight ends for you?
Yeah, so Kittle would probably, it's interesting. He would probably come in after all of those guys, but when I factor in that he's like unowned right now, or at least on these early runs, he's coming in at like 5% ownership. Yeah, I do think he has the same exact upside, even if you only have a 28 pass attempt game. So when I prioritize it, factoring in the ownership, he's probably right around like the top 3 options with a Hooper and with a Ingram for me.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, the ownership certainly makes a difference here. And let's not forget, well, you know what? I'll get to that game in a second. It's the next one up. So I'll save the Evan Ingram discussion until we get there. On the opposite side, though, you have Washington. Terry McLaurin coming off a great game with Xavier Howard out for Miami. That was a spot that hopefully we all exploited, even if he was a little bit pricey. 100 yards and 2 touchdowns on the day, the only 2 scores for the Washington Redskins. And then really outside of him, you have guys like Paul Richardson, who didn't catch a single one of his 4 targets last week. Trey Quinn, nothing but a slot guy, seeing 4 targets a week. There's really nothing there. And then in the run game, Adrian Peterson was solid. A touchdown would have really sealed the deal on a great game, but he still got the 100-yard bonus. And then Chris Thompson, he didn't practice Wednesday. It's very possible that he doesn't play, dealing with turf toe. But it just, especially given what we've seen from San Francisco, I have a very tough time finding any interest, even contrarian interest, in the Washington Redskins this week.
Yeah, no interest. No interest in Peterson going up against San Fran's defense, allowing the fewest fantasy points per game, 12.7. And then you factor in the spread, almost a 10-point underdog. Even if Thompson does miss with turf toe, no interest there. Terry McLaurin, it's just a brutal matchup. Like, no matter who Terry McLaurin faces in this game, Josh, we know that Richard Sherman just doesn't come off of one side of the field. He's only allowing 2.6 receptions per game, 23 yards and 1 touchdown all year. Witherspoon is out. He wasn't allowing much production. His replacement mostly is only allowing so far through 2 games, 6 catches for 45 yards. So this defense is secondary. Really, the whole entire defense has been very solid. It's not a spot that I want to get to McLaurin. We also factor in that Washington, they didn't have Wes Martin, one of their guards, last week. He's trending towards not playing again. And Donald Penn was a limited participant. He played last week, but he's been playing banged up. So not a great situation. Nothing on Washington really standing out that is even viable for me.
All right. There will be plenty of spots where I will eat the chalk this week. Uh, Timothy mentioned something in YouTube about Fournette. Wait till I tell you what my initial exposure was when crunching lineups today. And I'm not saying like setting it without a cap. I mean setting it with a cap, crunching, 800 lineups and then sorting them. Needless to say, Fournette might be the highest owned player I've had all season, even higher than Christian McCaffrey a couple weeks ago. So we'll see how that works out for me. But talking about the Giants and Arizona Cardinals, this game is actually pretty appealing on many levels. It's got a 49.5 total. It's the second highest on the slate. So there's that. Giants have a 26.3 implied total, 23.3 for Arizona. So really nice for the Giants. Good enough. Actually, sorry, that total's up above 50 now, 50.5. Opened at 48.5, so it's up 2 points. Giants are 3-point favorites. We'll get to Barkley, who has been practicing. We'll get to Shepard, who has been practicing in a limited fashion. If anyone seems less likely to play of the three between him, Barkley, and Ingram, it would be Shepard. But starting with Ingram, a tight end position you mentioned is pretty deep. But when healthy this season, at least in decent matchups, Evan Ingram's been pretty solid. And I have to say, I really like this spot for him. I know some people don't believe in, Arizona versus tight ends. And it's going to change and they'll see positive regression against the position. Even if that's the case, and you know what? Maybe you're right. There was a Twitter discussion about it the other day. Even if you're right, like it's still a really good matchup. It's still a team that is running more plays than any other team in the league. It's still a spot where the Giants have their highest total of the season, and it might be their highest total of the season once the season is over with. So the question I have for you is, how do you weight the matchup? And Ingram's price compared to the other tight ends, how do you weight that against the fact that they will be likely be getting Barkley back, and they have Golden Tate in this offense now, and maybe Sterling Shepard. I think if Shepard doesn't return, then you're looking at a very much more appealing spot for Ingram, but I like him either way.
Yeah, I like him either way as well. And it's really about how you prioritize your lineup, because it's not like last week where Kittle and Hooper were pretty much the same price and people like both of them. This week, there's a $1,000 to $2,000 price difference on some of these guys. So I think it's fine if you want to prioritize the lineup that way. Yeah, I see the discussions on Twitter about the tight end position with Arizona. And yeah, surely due to regress, it's already slowly regressing just from a Tyler Eifert game. It's going to weigh it. But you also have to keep in mind that for the most part, there's like 5-6 good tight ends in the league that can skew your team's defense against tight ends. This team has been bad against them, but Evan Ingram is one of those guys. So when it comes to having a really good matchup for a really good tight end, it's a great spot. The price point finally comes up for tight ends overall. He's at 6,500. So I like the spot. I think the matchup is fantastic for his talents. And a lot of the times why you see teams just regressing against defending the tight end is maybe they faced pretty much like Rob Gronkowski in the first week, and then had to face Travis Kelce in week 4. Like, it's going to regress because you're going to face less pass catching tight ends. Evan Ingram, we know, is probably top 3, top 4 in the league as a tight end in the passing game. So yeah, I like him. It's just a matter of how you want to prioritize your lineup around those price points.
What about Saquon Barkley here at a price point that is very expensive, but for good reason? I mean, he is one of, if not, you know what, it's McCaffrey, but Barkley's definitely one of top 3 fantasy producers in the game. If you look at his salary, he is the highest priced player, not just running back, but the highest priced player on Fanduel at 8,600. He's the highest priced player on Draftkings at 8,900. No other player comes within $900 of him. That's Dalvin Cook, who on yesterday's show, Chris Spaggs said he likes very much this week. And on our sponsor, Yahoo, you've got Saquon Barkley coming in at 35. Now that's important because Dalvin Cook is $40. Deshaun Watson's $39. Amari Cooper in the Sunday night game, whether he plays or not, is 37. So Barkley's price on Yahoo compared to the rest of these guys above him is definitely too low.
Yeah, I agree. It's too low over there. And I'm trying to pull up some of the ownership stuff on Barkley. I just know that like right now on the main slate on DraftKings, he's coming in very low, and it makes sense. Like, I just have not built a ton of lineups right now. They look an initial crunch, but it seems like just the price point's restrictive, especially when we get to Leonard Fournette's price tag. And if you do want to pay up a little bit for an Evan Ingram, the price tag is restricting a lot of people to get him in their lineups and feel comfortable. Sub 10% ownership right now on Saquon. I think it's sub 8. What I do usually on Fridays, if I see Saquon Barkley, really an elite running back that's in a good spot, in a pace up, high total, coming back from injury, whatever it might be. If I see him coming in lower owned than I think he should be, and really that's where he is right now, I'll prioritize it a little bit more, but nothing major. I do think the price point is restrictive. I was surprised to see that the Cardinals last year, terrible against running backs overall, but in the passing game, not surrendering too much. Look, last week, Devonta Freeman gets in the end zone, but on 3 catches. And then Christian McCaffrey this year, 3 catches against them. Carson had the best day in the air, 4 catches for 40 yards. So I guess it's an average matchup in the air, but we know what his skill set is. It's just, I think the price point's a little bit restrictive, and I don't expect to have too much.
Yeah, I think it's prohibitive too. I do think though, on Yahoo, that's a whole lot different. I mean, $5 difference on Yahoo is a lot. And if it's Dalvin Cook against Detroit at 40 and Barkley against Arizona in a 50.5 over-under game, I will more than willingly go to Saquon Barkley here. But you're going to see that, I would imagine, reflected in ownership as well. Right now, though, Saquon Barkley, even on Yahoo, is not getting a ton. Let's see here. Oh, you know what? He might not be showing. That might be why. I guess once we get the update, then we'll know. Once we get the update, we'll have a better idea in terms of whether or not he's going to be there. Unless I just didn't update. That might be it. Do you have a Yahoo ownership pulled up?
Yeah, I do. And I think it's waiting on the update because of injury reports, because right now he is coming in at, it was like 0.1%.
Yeah,
so like
okay. So that's not happening. I would expect Dalvin Cook's ownership. What's he at on Yahoo?
Dalvin right now on Yahoo is coming in. Let me pull him up. Dalvin Cook is coming in at 11%.
Okay. I would almost expect him to come down and Barkley definitely to go up. Do you think Shepard plays? And if not, any interest in Darius Slayton, who played 98% of the snaps last week for the New York Giants against the New England Patriots and was actually pretty involved in this game, whether you like the guy or not? He had 8 targets. 9 targets went to Tate. 7 went to Red Ellison. But, guys like Cody Latimer saw nothing. It was really Slayton and Golden Tate at the wide receiver position.
Yeah, so with Sterling Shepard, still battling a concussion, limited participant. I think he still has to get cleared from the protocol. So as of right now, I don't think he plays, but we'll see really on today's practice and Friday if he can get through protocol. If he doesn't play, I just imagine it is a tough matchup with Patrick Peterson returning for Arizona if he suits up this week for just Slayton on the outside. I think I do like Golden Tate in the slot against Tremaine Brock in this game. Tremaine Brock, when quarterbacks are targeting so far this year, 123 passer rating against him. He's given up 18 catches, 292 yards, and 2 touchdowns on just 28 targets. So it's a good spot for Golden Tate, which now 3 to 4 weeks in a row with Daniel Jones starting, all he's been primarily doing, and again, most of that's without Saquon and Evan Ingram, but all primarily doing is looking to the middle of the field from the slot. So I think Golden Tate benefits in a very good matchup.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I don't think you see Slayton shadowed, but I think you would see, maybe like 40% of his routes come against Patrick Peterson, who's returning from the suspension. What about the opposite side of this one? I would imagine that you're going to see guys like David Johnson and Larry Fitzgerald getting enough ownership, but not a crazy amount either. David Johnson right now at the running back position, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 highest projected owned running back. Larry Fitzgerald at wide receiver. This is on DraftKings, by the way. Larry Fitzgerald, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 8th highest projected. So you're seeing definitely some interest, some popularity, but not over the top ownership. And I think a lot of that might just be who's around them. But also, we have Christian Kirk projected to play right now at 5% ownership. If he does play and he's not limited, I'll have quite a bit of interest in Kirk. But I do worry right now that he won't play. Coach Cliff Kingsbury, easy for me to say, said that he's closer than he was last week, right? but he's still practicing in a limited fashion. And while his ankle is better, he hasn't been able to cut on it while running yet. So usually wide receivers need to cut on their ankles. I'm a little worried that Kirk doesn't play.
Yeah, I am too, actually. So limited participant. And at first I thought it was a did not practice, but a limited participant. And the one report they said they're going to be very cautious, and he needs to be 100% before they put him back on the field. All the sentiment that was coming out yesterday from beat writers was just pretty much that there's not a positive, at least through one practice for the week, that Kirk suits up. So keep an eye on that. There's a lot of moving pieces, and that's like the big piece of it. David Johnson doesn't practice yesterday, not with his back injury, but with a new ankle injury. So we'll see what's going on there. Tons of top end running backs. Kamara dealing with an high ankle sprain. We'll see if anything comes out Thursday and Friday there. But yeah, Christian Kirk at his price point, and if the ownership doesn't reflect quick enough, especially if he's sort of a game time decision, if he plays, he's good. If he plays, they already told you right now he has to be 100% to play. So if he ends up suiting up at 11:30 or whatever time this game locks, an hour and a half before inactives come out, you can feel really confident that he's a full go for that game, not going to be limited at all. So I think that's nice that we get that early on. But the matchup for both Kirk and Fitzgerald in the slot are going to be fantastic.
Amazing.
So, yeah, it's going to be so good. So what the Giants don't have is they just don't have a lot of depth at cornerback, and they don't have a lot of slot cornerback depth. Like Janoris Jenkins has played 20 snaps in the slot. That's the second most on the team. So Jenkins is going to be forced into the slot by the amount of times if Kirk plays that Arizona runs 4 wide receiver sets. I imagine you get Jenkins on Kirk, and it'll probably be switched up a little bit. But Grant Haley, he's given up the most yards in the slot this year, 38 more than anybody else. He's been absolutely abysmal in the slot. Jenkins this year has been bad, 22 catches, 351 yards, and 3 touchdowns so far. So, yeah, if Kirk is a full go, this whole offense changes. Obviously, track the David Johnson news. If he's out, Chase Edmonds becomes much better. But this is a really appealing spot. I like pretty much the entire Arizona offense, and I think that Kirk and Fitzgerald stacks with Murray are very much live if everybody's healthy.
Grant Haley has allowed receptions on 79% of the passes that have been thrown his way this year. That's not good.
Yeah, no, he's only been out of the slot for one targeted. So he's pretty much in the slot. The only time he came out of the slot. Yeah, the only time he came out of the slot and he was targeted, he gave up a 30-yard reception.
There you go. Yeah, it's been brutal. I love this spot for both of them. As we know, Christian Kirk does still run, close to 50% of his routes out of the slot. So you'd see him in there as well. But like you said, even if he's on the outside, you're not worried about that either. So actually, hold on. Is he running only 16% of his snaps in this? Wow. Okay. Earlier in the season, he had run, I think like the first 2 games, he ran a lot more snaps out of the slot.
Wait, Kirk?
Yeah. But now it's 82% on the left side.
Oh, it's 82% on the left side. Okay, yeah. I saw that stat earlier, and I thought it said 82% slot. That's what I wrote down, so I should put left.
Maybe, hold on. Let me check. Because I thought it was the same thing last time I looked at it.
Yeah, just because they're running so much 4 wide, but 82, I haven't checked it.
Oh, no, you're right. Okay, I think you're right. You're right. 82%. Okay,
like
I was going to say.
Trying to scroll through that whole thing.
No, I was going to say, that doesn't seem right. Last time I looked, he was up there in slot routes. So, yeah, 82%, my fault. And then Fitzgerald is what? 92%?
He doesn't leave it. Yeah, he doesn't leave the slot. And it's crazy because Kirk's missed like what? Was it just 1 game or has it been 2 games now?
He's missed 2 games now.
Yeah, he's missed 2 games and he's still ranked 11th in slot routes run. That's how many plays this team's running.
Right. It's crazy.
Yeah.
His last game was week 4. So
yeah, and he left that one early, which is just crazy that he's top 11 in routes run. He's tied for 10th actually with Edelman.
It's insane. It is. They had 1 overtime game, but still, that should not make that big of a difference. Before we move on to Indy, what do you have on David Johnson, and do you have any interest in any other receivers for Arizona? I'll say quickly, I don't, and the reason for this is pretty simple. Kyler Murray's not taking enough deep shots to make it work. Will he start opening it up more? I think he will once you get a little bit more comfortable, once his leash gets a little bit longer. But guys like Keyshawn Johnson, 3 receptions, 22 yards, 2 for 14, 3 for 13. Everything is just these short or barely intermediate routes. It doesn't do you any good. So you need a touchdown. I don't see that happening. I'm by the way saying if Kirk is out. And then Damiere Byrd, he's had a big play or 2 this season, really only 1 above 20 yards. And it just, there doesn't seem to be a lot of upside there, especially given how Kyler Murray really he's trying to feed Fitzgerald. If Kirk's there, he's going to feed him. And then you have the running back so involved in the passing game that you're leaving scraps for guys like Bird and Cooper and Johnson, and I just don't think it's worth it.
Yeah, I don't think it's worth it either. Keyshawn Johnson, he ran 36 routes last week. He was on the field a ton, but that was the first game back for Bird from injury. Bird's going to run more than 12 routes a week. I think they were just working him back in. So no real interest there. For David Johnson, yeah, I mean, he's third behind Fournette and McCaffrey in routes run as a running back, and that's with missing like a quarter and a half from the week 3 game, I believe. He played 75% of the snaps, even with all the injury concerns last week. And he's second on the slate in targets behind Eckler. So it's important to know what's happening with his health, because if this was just the same back injury, you're like, okay, he'll rehab through the week, he'll get through it. But now a new ankle injury pops up, and those have been giving guys like Kamara and obviously Saquon big trouble. So we'll see what comes out today and tomorrow. I do like David Johnson. My only concern is that this offensive line, he's been getting all of his production for the most part through the air. That's why you're getting a lot of value to hit that price point. I mean, that can surely continue, but this offensive line for this week, it has the second worst run blocking advantage. So it could be a game that just dominated through the air against a really poor secondary of the Giants. So that's my only concern to pay up for him. But again, monitor the health. If he's out, Chase Edmonds becomes like just a world beater at a $4,700 price tag.
Yeah, I think you make a good point. I actually mentioned this earlier in the week. The Giants' run defense hasn't really been a massive weak spot for them. Right? It's not, and we shouldn't expect anything about this defense to be spectacular. But it's in the top half of the league, according to Pro Football Focus. I think Football Outsiders has them like 13th or so. Yeah, 13th. They haven't been that bad as far as run defense goes. It's the pass defense that has been shredded to pieces every single game, which is why I think Johnson's fine, because he's going to get work in the passing game. But I like Fitzgerald a lot more, and I like this passing game a lot more.
Yeah, I agree. I like the passing game more, especially if Kirk's in there. That'll probably be the thing that decides it for me.
It'll make it a lot easier to play Kyler Murray and be able to get more than just one receiver there. Otherwise, you'll probably be pairing him with David Johnson. And I don't know if that's optimal in this spot, just based on how many good running back options we have this week. Let's talk about the Colts and the Houston Texans. This is another game where you have, I think the total's probably somewhere in the middle, towards the top, 47 over under, 1 point favorites. Colts are only favored by 1 point at home. So both these teams at 20, Colts 24 implied total, 23 for the Houston Texans. Carlos Hyde coming off a big game, draws a much more difficult matchup this week though. And I'll say it again, and we can start with him. DeAndre Hopkins. It's been a struggle, and I don't necessarily know what to do with him at this point. I think, well, you know what? We can talk about it now, but initially I did not get much exposure to DeAndre Hopkins when I ran these crunches. And a lot of that was because I got a ton of Rams receivers. I got a decent amount from Atlanta. The Jalen Ramsey news certainly throws a wrench into that, but I got a lot from a select few teams. I didn't find myself getting a lot of DeAndre Hopkins right now.
Yeah, I don't think I will either. And it's just scary because we know what this guy can do. And it seems like he's been bottled up. Yeah, it seems like he's been bottled up. But the price point is a little bit restrictive. And then also you have the Colts who, although they played very heavy man against Kansas City, and that's something that a lot of teams have been doing and having success against the Chiefs so far. Interested to see if they do it tonight. I imagine they will in Denver. But this team is a very zone-heavy team. And what that does is it pretty much says you're not going to beat us over the top. Or Hopkins routes, like you saw, they weren't that deep routes in the last game. So in terms of like PPR value, there's still some there, but you want him to hit a ceiling to pay off that price tag. So it's tough for me to get there. Now, if these were man matchups, and again, I don't expect it because they play such heavy zone, the Colts, if these were man matchups, it's just a smash spot for both Hopkins and Fuller. You have the primary corners are a guy named Yasin, who's given up 5 catches for 81 yards and a touchdown and 7 targets. And then I believe it's pronounced Daysire, who's given up 8 catches for 99 yards and 9 targets. These guys are getting roasted, but they're very heavily relying on zone. And that's another reason they play zone is they don't have talent to match up with these guys one-on-one. So yeah, Hopkins at that price point, what this defense is going to do is restrict ceiling games. That's its main mission. And you need a ceiling game from Hopkins to pay off that price.
You do. By the way, I misspoke. Not a more difficult matchup for Carlos Hyde, but also not a spot where I think they're going to have to rely on the ground. The Colts run defense, I think, actually ranks bottom 5 according to Pro Football Focus and Football Outsiders. But Carlos Hyde, look, he's clearly the bell cow back at this point. The problem I have is I don't know if you can prioritize Carlos Hyde in a spot like this. Last week, absolutely. Loved the guy. This week, I probably won't find myself getting to as much of him. And most of that, Sal, comes down to one simple fact. That low 5K range, specifically on DraftKings, opens enough up where I don't really need to roll the dice on Carlos Hyde. What about you?
Yeah, I'm probably not going to get there. And even since I like probably have biases that I should look at in terms of just pass catching guys, but Hyde in general, I think this Colts defense, like you said, on the ground, they're not fantastic. They're not allowing a lot of fantasy points, but not because they're not allowing a lot of yardage. They're just not letting running backs get in the end zone,
Yeah.
which is very variant. So Hyde, he does have 14 red zone rushing attempts. We've been seeing him every single week. It seems like just getting goal line touchdowns. So I think there's some upside there at the price point because he is around 17 rushes per game or somewhere in that range and all the goal line work. So he's too cheap still. But it's by like $300, which is right around some of those other 5K guys we'll talk about. So not a priority for me. If I had this, let me look like a list that's up. He comes in like the 12th or 13th running back on it.
What about Will Fuller?
Yeah, Fuller kind of same thing as Hopkins here. This zone coverage is just going to completely just break any ceiling type games. Fuller should have had another monster game last week, dropped 2 touchdown passes, at least 2 that I saw. It's the same analysis as above, really. I think I prefer Fuller to Hopkins for sure, just because you can fit it into your lineups better. But this is not a spot where I want to get to either of them. I'm not that high on Watson either this week.
Yeah, not a spot that I'm in love with. And I don't think, look, you're not going to hear me say the Colts defense is spectacular. I don't think they are. But you made a good point. They've done a pretty good job of red zone defense and just keeping teams from putting up monster numbers. And, offensively, they've sustained long enough drives to where you keep the opposing team off the field. It certainly doesn't do them any favors. But look, they have not allowed – they allowed 30 points to the Chargers, but that was 24 points before overtime, 17 to Tennessee, 24 to Atlanta. They got smoked by Oakland, and then 13 to Kansas City. I think this is a middle-of-the-road defense. I don't think it's terrible. I don't think they're great. On the other side of this one, though, where you've got the Colts at home against Houston, very slight favorites. T.Y. Hilton is coming in as ultra chalk right now. And you know what? I do understand it. He's $5,900 on DraftKings. I've said to you before, he's not a one-trick pony. This guy can do whatever you need him to do, and he's even been more efficient and more utilized in the red zone this season. So, I mean, on FanDuel, you got T.Y. Hilton at $7,600. He is the 6th highest priced wide receiver. On DraftKings, you got T.Y. Hilton at $5,600. He's, let's see, 12, 13, 14, 15, 15th highest priced receiver. Massive difference in value you're getting there.
Yeah, I agree. And it's all coming from the price. That's what it is. Like the ownership being up that high on him is a little bit, I guess, uneasy for a play like that. I didn't think he was going to get really anywhere near that.
I think it'll come down, by the way.
Yeah, and I hope that it does. And there's some other guys in that range we'll talk about that I disagree with some ownership there. But yeah, Hilton, it's a good spot for him coming off of the bye. Seems fully healthy now. And they're not going to scheme like they did against KC to run the ball. There's an obvious reason you scheme to run the ball against Kansas City. Against Tennessee, it's sort of a middle-of-the-pack run defense. You probably have just as much of an advantage targeting them through the air. Track the status of Jonathan Joseph, but even if he plays, don't get worried if you like T.Y. Jonathan Joseph this year, 105 pass rating against him, giving up 20 receptions, a 70% completion percentage, 234 yards and a touchdown. T.Y. is the type of guy in GPPs that we all know can break slates, and he's just too cheap. I saw somebody in the chat say that Will Fuller at $6,000 was too cheap. T.Y. is much more consistent, and he's cheaper. So, yeah, I think the ownership is a little bit higher than I'd like, but I don't think it's wrong.
Honestly, Will Fuller or T.Y. Hilton at the same price for me is not even like,
yeah,
ownership agnostic. It's not even a question for me, to be honest with you. Like, I just think it's T.Y. Hilton, as you pointed out, is more consistent, and he is their featured wide receiver. Whereas with Will Fuller, he can still have some big games, and DeAndre Hopkins might not be having a great year, but DeAndre Hopkins is still the clear, defined number one. Hilton is the clear number one in Indy, and it's not close. So I think that's enough to differentiate for me, and I'd feel pretty okay about that, to be honest with you. But do you have any interest anywhere else here outside of T.Y. Hilton? Maybe Marlon Mack or anybody? It's a tough one for me to get to other than T.Y. Hilton.
Yeah, so I prefer pass catching running backs, but I actually really like Marlon Mack in this spot, averaging the most rushing attempts per person on this slate at 20.2. But also, Indy's offensive line has the best matchup on Pro Football Focus against the defensive line in the run block, not in the pass blocking, but that's all we care about from Marlon Mack is in the running game. I do like this spot here. Middle of the pack defense in Houston, 15th ranked right now against the run. The only issue is that Marlon Mack, in the first 2 or 3 weeks, people were posting about, he's running more routes than Nyheim Hines. It's balancing out right now, and Nyheim Hines is averaging over 4 targets per game to Max 1.8. So that's my major concern, but it's a very good matchup and advantage for this offensive line for a guy who, in this situation, more times than not, probably sees 18 to 20 touches.
Okay. What about Green Bay and Oakland? We don't know what's going on here with some of these receivers. I don't expect Devontae Adams to play. He still hasn't practiced this week. That's usually a really bad sign. Really, he'd have to get a full practice in by Friday, and I don't see that being the case. Geronimo Allison also didn't practice. So you've got to wonder if Allen Lazard ends up being one of the chalkier options this week in the event that we get injury news and both Adams and Allison are out. Right now, you've got the Green Bay Packers as a touchdown favorite at home. They are 5.5 point favorites, 46.5 total. They have a 26 implied total here, so that's pretty nice. And as we saw on Monday Night Football, Aaron Rodgers was not afraid to go to Allen Lazard. Chris Baggs pointed out that it wasn't an injury, but it looked like Valdez-Scantling was benched. Maybe you have some insight on that as a Packers guy. But Allison saw 7 targets. Lazard was next with 5, tied with Jimmy Graham. I feel like oh, and by the way, Jones and Williams both were involved in the passing game. But if Allison is out, who led all receivers in targets, you're looking at a speed guy in Valdez-Scantling, who's not going to be a possession-type receiver hauling in a ton of looks every week. And then you've got Lazard and Jake Kumaro and Darius Shepard. I mean, it definitely feels like a spot that we could exploit if we get news.
Yeah, exactly. This is a sticky spot. There's a lot of moving pieces right now. So yeah, Adams, I don't expect to play. I don't think the timetable on Adams, I don't even think there is one right now. Like I would expect this week and probably next week that he'll be out. Hasn't even been able to put his shoes on, they're saying. So Geronimo Allison, a concussion and a chest injury on the same exact play, doesn't practice. I'm not expecting Allison to play. MVS didn't even practice. So MVS, he did come out of that game. He left in the first half with a pretty bad hit, and then he came back in the second half to start the third quarter, and he didn't practice. So maybe that's a little bit more precautionary because he did finish the game. So I expect MVS to be out there. But yeah, I think, and Lazard's a guy that I've been kind of hyping up since the preseason, at least for this Packers team that didn't draft the wide receiver, which was a little bit foolish, it seems now. But yeah, Shepard is very raw. We saw him he's looked terrible now in a game and a half of play. Jake Kumaro has not done anything in terms of separation, in terms of getting open. If indeed Allison is out and Adams is out, I would expect Lazard to be a guy who's out there a ton, maybe running the second most routes. Now, the Packers did sign Ryan Grant, former Redskin, former Raider, for a little revenge game here, but they signed him yesterday. He's going to practice today and tomorrow, so I don't know how much he'll be caught up to speed in the playbook. If you see Allison out and Adams, as I expect, out, Lazard at $3,000 is definitely in play. I don't think it's something that you have to be jamming into 100% of your lineups if you're somebody who plays like 5 to 10 lineups, but I would have pieces of it. It's an interesting spot, and we saw Rodgers on 11 routes run targeted him, 5 or 6 times, so there's some trust there early on, and he's a dominant receiver, 6'5" guy. Obviously had a really good career in college, and it's so far translated through a very small sample of 2 games.
Yeah, I mean, he ran 11 routes on 17 snaps. So that's good to know. Not the snap count, but simply the fact that when he was out there, Rodgers was looking his way. And look, if it's true in Valdez-Scantling, because look, ankle injuries, these knee injuries and stuff, I'm no doctor, but you know that players, it happens all the time in basketball, they'll come back in the same game and then they'll be out for a week because of the swelling that subsequently comes with it. So, dude, if any combination of 2 of these guys are out, I think it really, really makes life difficult on Rodgers. I'd prefer it to be Allison out over Valdez-Scantling because then Lazard could hopefully take over a role where he's targeted more across the entire field. Yes. But I definitely think Aaron Rodgers, for me at least, is a stay away here, even against Oakland. I know it, dude. He's better than most quarterbacks at making no-name receivers look good, but I just don't know I trust him out there with Jimmy Graham and Jake Kumaro. Like, I like Lazard, but that's price point and not necessarily talent.
Yeah, I think that Yeah, you can't trust Aaron Rodgers here. Just the guys he's going to be going out there with. Even if Allison's healthy, I still don't trust him. Like, I don't think Allison being healthy helps all that much. He had another 2 drops in this past week. Like, if Allison even plays, you can see Lazard getting snaps over him out of the slot. Lazard ran 4 out of those 11 routes out of the slot. So yeah, it's a spot that I don't want Aaron Rodgers. I do think that like those penalties were definitely just kind of casting over as they probably should. But just what was very good work with the receivers that he had. But even then, it's just not a spot you trust him. Even Jimmy Graham didn't practice on Wednesday. We'll see how this team goes moving forward, but it's going to be a bunch of injuries and probably a couple wide receivers out.
Is Jimmy Graham dealing with an injury though?
Yeah, I don't know. Matt LaFleur came out and reporters just straight up asked him, is Jimmy Graham going to start seeing less playing time, dropping a touchdown, not being much productive? And he was like, no, the same role moving forward. He did not practice Wednesday, though. They did take off Jay Sternberger, who I think is I don't know. I think he's a second-year pro now. He was on the IR, somebody that they had a lot of high hopes for in the preseason. So I don't think he's eligible to return this week. But yeah, Jimmy Graham should be a guy starting to see less snaps there. We'll just see what the coach actually does.
Any interest in the backfield here? Not for a wildly expensive Aaron Rodgers, but you mentioned Jamal Williams on Tuesday that maybe you'd have some tepid interest there.
Yeah, so I sent out a tweet. I want to pull it up now. I don't really have any interest in Aaron Jones at that price tag and just the ability and the amount of time that you're going to still get from Jones or Williams playing. But when these guys have played 4 full games together, Williams is playing 50% of the snaps. He's running 1 route more per game, and he's only seeing 4 less touches. So, like, if you wanted to play a Packers running back, I would play Williams for the price discount, but I'm not going to get to either of them.
On the Oakland side, you've got Josh Jacobs coming in at what I would consider to be a discount. And the only reason for that, too, being volume. I mean, if half the receivers are out for Green Bay, I wouldn't be surprised to see this game stay at least a little bit competitive. Opened at 6.5 point spread. It's down to 5.5. We'll see if there's any more movement on that throughout the week. But Jacobs coming in at $5,000 on the road. They're dogs, so none of that is great. But I also think there is an avenue, right? There is a way that Jacobs sees like 20 touches in this game, and at $5,000, I'm at least going to entertain the idea.
Yeah, I think it is actually an appealing spot. Same price point as Mixon, so it's hard to kind of differentiate them. But right now, coming off the bye, he's seeing almost 18 rushing attempts per game. He has 14 red zone rushes. And yeah, if the Packers are going to be beaten up on offense, instead of this game, maybe people think it becomes a blowout in Green Bay, it could stay a lot closer. So the one thing I will say is the Packers did hold down in a positive game script for Kerryon Johnson. They limited him last week, and a big reason why was Dean Lowry, one of their defensive interior players that they were really confident in. That's why they let Mike Daniels go. He probably had the best game of his season. He's been battling injury all year long, been playing limited. So we'll see and watch that trend as it moves forward. But yeah, Jacobs at $5,000 is definitely appealing, especially if you get Allison and Adams out.
Yeah. Really, the way I see it is I definitely like Joe Mixon this week. It's a little bit risky. I definitely like Joe Mixon, but I wouldn't say he's that much riskier than Jacobs, just based on how absolutely and utterly incapable this team has been in terms of being able to block. So, I mean, run blocking's been one of the worst. You look at everything, adjusted line yards, they're 31st. They've been stuffed more than any other team in the league, which means the rush for no yards or stopped at the line of scrimmage or behind the line of scrimmage. I mean, everything here is towards the bottom of the league. Running back yards based on the line is 30th out of 32. I mean, that's a big issue, and we'll get to that. But again, I don't think Josh Jacobs is that much riskier than he is than Joe Mixon is. So we'll see where this goes. We'll see what ownership looks like, and we'll take it from there. But yeah, Josh Jacobs, you mentioned this. A good amount of red zone opportunities. Now, to be fair, 8 of them came in the first week, but when they get into the red zone, Josh Jacobs is definitely somebody that is seeing those opportunities. 7 of those looks have come inside the 10, 3 of them have come inside the 5. So once they get in there with goal to go, Jacobs is being featured, and I like to see that. Any other interest here in the wide receivers? Tyrell Williams is questionable. He's got plantar fasciitis, which sucks, and who knows when he'll be back. He had actually scored in every single game he'd played this season. But I think the big question is, what are we doing with Darren Waller, who at the moment is garnering more ownership than any tight end not named Mark Andrews, and I think that will also change throughout the week.
Yeah, the ownership that's coming in on Waller surprised me a little bit, but I do think he's too cheap, and I do think this is a good spot for him. So
Sorry,
if you
I
look
meant
at
I think Andrews' ownership will actually come down. I should have clarified that.
That's fair. Yeah, so I do think this is a good spot for Waller still. Anytime you see defensive stats against a tight end, they're usually swayed. Outside of Ertz, who had a solid game for double teams against the Packers, the best guy they played was just on Monday night. TJ Hawkinson caught 4 balls for 21 yards and dropped a touchdown. So tight ends, or it's defense against the tight ends very much skewed. I do think Waller's a good spot here. He's second on the slate for air yards for tight ends for the team's target share. He's averaging almost 9 targets a game. It's just a really good spot for this guy, and I like this spot at the price point. And yeah, I will say that, Tyrell Williams, they traded for Zay Jones. So that should tell you a little bit of how they're feeling about Tyrell Williams' chances of playing anytime in the near future. So it's really going to have to go through the guy who just got extended for like a 5-year or 4-year extension last night, Darren Waller. So props to him. And yeah, I think he's in a good spot. The ownership though, and a lot of these tight ends, and I heard you mention on the show yesterday, it's very easy now to differentiate the good tight ends. So you're going to have majority of the tight ends at 15+% ownership and not a big difference between them. I think I prefer Evan Ingram if you have the salary, but if you don't, $2,000 almost less is Darren Waller, and there's nothing bad I can say about him in this matchup. He's seeing almost 30% target share from Derek Carr. It's I think at 26 now.
Yeah. Last game, he saw only 5 targets, but keep in mind they were controlling that game on the ground, surprisingly, against Chicago. I don't see that being the case at Lambeau Field. You're going to need to throw the ball. I definitely like Waller here. And mind you, he hasn't scored this season. So Everything that he's done was strictly on receptions and yards, which is nice. Detroit and Minnesota, let's move it here. 5th game on the slate. Detroit actually opened as a 1-point favorite. They're now 1-point dogs at home. And you've got neither team with particularly high totals. 21.8 for Detroit, 22.8 for Minnesota, and a 44.5 total. We can start with Dalvin Cook here, who's projected to get quite a bit of ownership. I'm not getting to the passing game very much in this spot. On the opposite side, I think Curry Johnson's ownership right now is higher than it should be. And outside of one game, he's been very, very underwhelming. But we can start with Dalvin Cook and then work our way over to the other side. How do you feel about him this week at a $900 discount from Saquon Barkley on DraftKings?
Yeah, I like that discount definitely off of Saquon, and I think that's a spot that I get to more. But I do have some concerns about Dalvin Cook. Not anything major, but if Mike Daniels plays for Detroit, I think it's a sneaky tough matchup against the front of Mike Daniels and Snacks Harrison. You would have a bottom 10, and it would be bottom 8 actually on this slate matchup for Minnesota against that defensive line if Mike Daniels is in. He didn't practice Wednesday, so he might actually not play once again. It doesn't seem like it's trending positively. But yeah, Dalvin Cook, he's averaging 22.3 opportunities per game. He has 16 red zone rushing attempts. The crazy thing is Alexander Mattison has 10 red zone rushing attempts. The amount of work they have in the red zone and how much of a better season Cook can have if it was just solely him is amazing. So I do think $8,000 is a fair price point. I get to it more than Saquon, but the amount, and I want to see the amount you're going to get to Fournette, the amount I get to Fournette might limit the actual upside that I get.
My first crunch was 92%.
Yeah, I wrote earlier today in my notes that if I get 75% of him, I won't blink an eye at it, really.
Yep.
So the amount that I'm going to get of him and knowing that he's 7K, not a terrible price point, but pairing that with 8K, it's just a lot of lineups that look very similar at that point. So nothing terrible for Cook. If indeed Mike Daniels is in, I feel better about not getting as much of him. But we know the offense is going to go through him, and he's the only piece of Minnesota that I really want to prioritize this week.
Let me point out, though, Alexander Mattison, he had 4 red zone attempts in 2 different games. In week 1, he had 1. In week 2, he had none. In week 4, he had none. In week 5, he had 1. He had 4 against Oakland, a disgusting blowout. And then against the Eagles last week, also a blowout, he had 4. So in a game that's projected to be very competitive, I don't think Madison gets as much of these opportunities. Now, he was getting some work against Philly when the game was somewhat close, but from what we've seen on most of the season, it has been Dalvin Cook in competitive games. So you're right. The numbers could be even crazier, no question. But I'm not expecting in this game, especially in a divisional game, which we should see a good overall affair. I don't see Dalvin Cook really losing out on many opportunities. Do you have any interest in the passing game before we talk Detroit?
No, if anything, I would have interest in Thielen. There's a really good chance that Slay is on Thielen. Slay in a limited sample hasn't been fantastic this year, but the reason that I like Thielen there is they'll move him around much more into the slot and get him better matchups and actually scheme for him there, as opposed to Diggs, who will just stay outside. And we know the matchup last week was obviously fantastic for Diggs. Diggs even has a good matchup against what will likely be Rashawn Melvin. And he has obviously the air yards just completely tilted from one game. But if anything, I'll get to Diggs, or Thielen. I mean, but I'm not really getting to either of them in this spot, especially with other wide receivers around them.
What do you think of Curry and Johnson? I gave you my opinions on it today, or a little bit today, and particularly yesterday. I think it's a shitty matchup. The price tag is fair. I definitely understand the matchup, or I'm sorry, the price tag. That makes sense to me. But Minnesota's run defense is one of the better units in the league. I don't think this is going to be a particularly great quote unquote bounce back spot for Curry and Johnson, who outside of a game against Kansas City, who I've said a million times, this run defense is god awful. Outside of that, listen to this. 13 for 34 against Green Bay, scored a touchdown, somewhat salvaged. 20 for 36, he scored a touchdown against Philly, but horrible production. 12 for 41 against the Chargers, 16 for 49, even in an overtime game against Arizona. He's had one game this season, Sal, where he's averaged more than 3.5 yards per carry, and he's averaging 3.3 yards per attempt on the year. Take away that Kansas City game and the touchdowns, which are a volatile stat to begin with. It's been a miserable season for Curry and Johnson.
Yeah, he hasn't done much. He had like that one receiving touchdown in a bad game as well. That kind of boosted that up a little bit. Hasn't done too much. Not much interest there outside of, the price point is lower. He's seen 3 weeks in a row, 70+% of the snaps. And pretty much what you're hanging your hat on if you do want to get to carry on is you still think he has skill, and I do. But also the fact that this might be the bottom number on him. Like, do we think we see carry on at $4,700? Maybe if it's another really bad performance, but this could be a bottom number price point in terms of just buying him at a low price and then seeing his price tag reflect upwards in the upper 5K, 6K range. So I think there's interest, and I really think that this slate comes down to, and maybe it won't, but comes down to this 5K range where there's like 5 running backs right around it that are all sort of head scratchers and have their upsides and downsides. So he just falls into the range for me of the Mixons and the Josh Jacobs, and he's probably the last one in that list, but he's still getting some interest for me just because he is seeing, like last week, 81% of the carries, although not a ton, 70+% of the snaps 3 weeks in a row. So there is some interest there, but it's just a spot that I don't feel good about. But I can say the same thing about Jacobs and Joe Mixon right now for me. So that's like the biggest piece in sort of the process for this week in me is kind of scraping through these 5K running backs.
Yeah, I prefer Mixon and Jacobs ahead of Curry and Johnson, especially if his ownership stays up. And right now we've got him at 24% on DraftKings. I just simply don't see myself getting anywhere close to that. Do you see yourself getting anywhere close to these Detroit pass catchers?
Wow. Okay. So I didn't know carry on's ownership was that high. That's actually surprising.
Oh yeah, dude.
Yeah.
He's right now projected for the 6th highest ownership on the week, not just at his position. I think it comes down, but if it stays anywhere close to that, yeah, I'm good.
Yeah, I agree, actually, after seeing that. Yeah, I have interest in Galladay, who's coming in at average to slightly below average ownership right now. He's probably going to face Trey Waynes, not Xavier Rhodes, because Trey Waynes has been just the better cornerback this year. Xavier Rhodes has been pretty terrible. He'll probably be on Marvin Jones Jr., just based on how they've been doing it the last couple of weeks with number one wide receivers. So I do like the matchup against Trey Waynes, who hasn't been fantastic. He's given up 27 receptions for 259 yards and 2 touchdowns through 6 weeks. Almost a 70% completion percentage. So Galladay seeing 9 targets a week, playing close to 90% of the snaps. And on this slate, he's averaging almost 16 air yards per target. So lots of upside like we know in Galladay. I do like Galladay. He's the one piece from this game overall that I think I'll get to the most.
Talking Cincinnati and Jacksonville. I've actually, believe it or not, been looking forward to getting to this game, Sal, because there's a lot to talk about. Cincinnati Bengals are just a bad football team. There's no two ways around it. This is an awful team, and they're worse than I thought they'd be. Even without AJ Green, this has been an atrociously bad team, atrociously bad.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even know if that makes sense because atrocious means bad, right? But that's how bad they've been, Sal. That I'm making up phrases for how bad the Bengals have been. They have a sub 20 implied total here. They're 4-point home dogs. Even with Jalen Ramsey out of Jacksonville, he healed up quick, by the way. Jacksonville 23.8 total, 4-point favorites on the road, and a 43.5 over under. Look, here's how I see it. I've already cited the stats. Run blocking's been really bad for Cincinnati. Run defense has maybe been even worse for the Jacksonville Jaguars. They rank dead last in run defense DVOA, behind even the Kansas City Chiefs. That to me is very surprising, but that's been the case this year, and I'm not going to argue the numbers. I mean, this is a Jacksonville defense that on all run defense that on all fronts has really struggled. They're allowing 5.2 yards per attempt. That's second worst behind, of course, only the Bengals. They're allowing 131.2 rushing yards per game. I just look across the board, and this run defense has been bad. So maybe this is an opportunity for Joe Mixon to finally do something of value. And maybe if AJ Green returns, it'll take a little bit of pressure off the backfield. What do you think?
Yeah, we'll see what happens with AJ Green there. Yeah, Joe Mixon, this is the one spot where on this team, Mixon, again, some interest there. He probably ranks right now. I have to figure it out 1A, 1B with like a Josh Jacobs, and then carry on a fall behind that in that 5K range. But yeah, you get him as a smaller underdog than Josh Jacobs is going to be. The volume was skewed for the first 2 weeks because he was a little bit limited, but we're not seeing him used in the passing game all that much. Like 2 weeks ago when they were trailing for most of the game, I was very surprised to see Mixon catch, I think, one ball the entire game on 2 targets. So that's a concern through the past 2 weeks where they've been trailing for most of the games. So definitely concerns there, but the price point kind of reflects that. They are going to get a little bit healthier at offensive line as Cordy Glenn's going to be coming back, a left tackle. Andre Smith, another offensive lineman. He's battling an ankle injury, but trending towards playing this week. So some signs of possibility and some upside for Mixon there. The rest of this team, I actually prefer Auden Tate over Tyler Boyd. Not by much, and it's not like I want much of either of them, but DJ Hayden in the slot has been very good, or at least pretty good so far this year, only giving up 91 passing yards in the slot so far through all their games. And then Auden Tate on the outside versus Trey Herndon. That's a very good matchup. Trey Herndon has given up 15 catches for 232 yards, and Auden Tate, through just pretty much 4 games now, has become a very real red zone target. 8 red zone targets, tied for the lead on this slate, and he hasn't even played. He didn't play the first 2 weeks of the year.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty wild. He salvaged that game a couple weeks ago with a touchdown. I guess it continues. It's very possible that it will. Tyler Eifert's been a complete non-factor. He's somebody that you would expect to at least have some involvement in the red zone, but he hasn't. If you're not familiar with Auden Tate, I know you are, Sal, but I guess when you're 6'5", 225, you're somewhat of an imposing presence in the red zone.
Yeah, and if anybody has like 2 minutes and just wants to see who Auden Tate is, go look at the 5 catches he made last week. Every single one of them was pretty much Mawson guys. Like he's just catching bad passes over the other person, just saving interceptions, and they're ending up in like 30-yard receptions. He was putting on a clinic last week, and he's the only reason why they were really moving the ball.
Yep, no question. I still think Mixon has an opportunity here. Whether or not he'll be able to, take advantage of it is a different story. But at least he's cheap enough to where I don't feel nearly as bad paying for him. Whereas other weeks you're like, all right, well, $6,100 Mixon against Arizona, that's fine. And I liked him that week. He started off with 60 yards on the opening drive. It didn't pan out. It hasn't panned out this season. But now he's cheap enough to where I'm saying, all right, Joe Mixon is he's the same price basically as Jamal Williams and Chase Edmonds and Latavius Murray. Of course, waiting on Kamara news. He's cheaper than Frank Gore and Matt Breida and Devin Singletary and Wayne Gallman, who's not even likely to play. I mean, that's crazy to me. So I will exploit that if I can. On the opposite side, we've got Jacksonville, 4-point favorites, as I mentioned. And really, Dede Westbrook's been, like you said, he's been a guy you've been waiting for that big game. It hasn't happened yet, but he is getting opportunities. And I think you and I discussed this last week. In terms of snaps and routes run and targets, it's not like DJ Chark has just run away with everything. That actually hasn't been the case. Westbrook has one more target than DJ Chark this season, right? Like he's been heavily involved in the offense. There's no doubt about it. Chark has 5 red zone looks. Westbrook has 3. It's not like you're getting a huge disparity there. And with snap counts, Sharks playing exactly the same, 306 of 396. They are on the field and involved the exact same amount. Shark has just done more with the opportunities. When I see something like that, though, Sal, I know that Westbrook's a decent enough receiver to hopefully be able to exploit these opportunities, especially when, what does he have? 45 targets. So he's averaging almost 8 targets per game. That's pretty solid.
Yeah, he's averaging almost 8 targets per game. He's going to get a matchup with BW Webb in the slot, who's been okay this year, maybe a little bit closer to better this year, but not a great cornerback overall throughout his career. So I think it's a solid spot. What is extremely important, maybe for really any of the games on this slate, if anything, in terms of injury news, this Bengals secondary is already bottom 4 in the league. They just lost their top 2 cornerbacks for this week. Drake Kirkpatrick's going to be out a month, and William Jackson III is going to be out for, they say, several weeks. Those were by far the only guys really playing on the outside of BW Webb in the slot. So now what you're going to get for Chris Conley and DJ Shark, and DJ Shark is going to face a guy named Tony McRae, who's played 49 snaps this year, giving up 6 receptions on just 7 targets that he has played. He's having 40% of the team's air yard. Shark. It's a matchup against one of the worst secondaries in the league that just lost 2 of their cornerbacks. And yeah, it's really hard not to like the passing game here, but it gets hard to like it because of how much Fournette a lot of people are probably going to have. So it's a tricky spot. Like everything in this game, at least will grade out to be optimal because of the matchups and injuries. I really like Shark. I think Westbrook, especially in cash at that price point, is more digestible to get to, I would say, just ceiling wise in tournaments. I like Shark here. Going to go up against that Tony McRae guy on the outside. But then, yeah, we haven't even talked about Leonard Fournette yet. Like this is a team that is in a very attractive spot on really all accounts.
Yeah, so saving the best for last, Leonard Fournette, second in total touches this year behind only Christian McCaffrey. He's seen 20-plus attempts in 3 straight games. He's been targeted around 6 times per game this season, which is really encouraging. And while he hasn't done a ton with those opportunities, he is catching them, and that's all that matters. I mean, he has 2 games this season where he's got a touchdown worth of receptions, right? That is great. And also, with these opportunities, you're going to start seeing some positive touchdown regression. He's got only 1 on the season. I expect to see more. There are very, very few running backs in the league right now that have as many opportunities as he do, that are on the field as often as Leonard Fournette is. 93% of snaps last week, 92% before that, 84, 100, 97, 86. It's insane, man. And like I said, I don't know. I only did 1 initial crunch when I sorted the lineups. I got, depending on how I did it, I got anywhere between 80 and 92% Fournette. If I ended up at 85% Fournette this week, barring an injury, I don't think that would kill me. It's risky. It's always risky to play that much of someone, but his price tag continues to not reflect his opportunity and his production. And until it does, I will just keep playing him at a very high clip.
Yeah, again, it's really risky to play that much, but everything for this spot looks really good for him. And he's going to continue to grade out just so well because, 16 red zone rushing attempts, leading the all running backs in routes run, and still just 1 touchdown. Like, more production is coming in the end zone for him against a team right now that's giving up the most fantasy points per game to the running back, top 5 in how many receptions they're giving up. They're giving up the 2nd most receiving yards, 2nd most rushing yards, 5th most attempts. Like everything here sets up for Leonard Fournette to see potentially his first 30 touch game of the year. I believe first 30 touch, but I would shoe in 25 opportunities and probably close to 24 touches as like a median projection here for the guy. And if things go his way, you could see 30 fairly easily for a guy who, yes, touchdown regression is coming, like a 2 touchdown game. Doesn't have to happen here, but if anywhere, it sets up the best to happen here.
Yep. He had 30 touches against Denver.
Okay, that's what I thought, yeah.
29 and 2. But I wouldn't be surprised if he had 30 carries in this game, honestly. Like, if they don't just outright feed him, I don't know. I wouldn't understand that. We already know that Doug Marrone doesn't like to throw the ball to begin with. I mean, I know that a lot of that was because he had Blake Bortles at quarterback, but let's not crown Gardner Minshew as, the next Peyton Manning either. He's fine. He's all right. He's played well. And given that they lost their starting quarterback in the first drive of week 1, Gardner Minshew has been a savior for this Jacksonville team. But I'm not going to go out there and pretend that he's a stud enough to the point where you don't run the ball at all, even against Cincinnati. So we've also pointed out too, Cincinnati's allowed 250 or more rushing yards in 3 of 6 games. And a lot of that has come against the running back, against the quarterback. Do you have interest in Gardner Minshew here, pairing him with Shark and Westbrook? By the way, the only problem I have with that is it means that I don't have Fournette in my lineup because I'm not throwing him in Minshew lineups. I don't think they score enough points to make that viable to win tournaments.
Yeah, I completely agree. That's the thing. I actually like Minshew in this matchup because of those injuries to the secondary, like we talked about. But actually getting to him with a stack of these wide receivers is tough. Like I would prefer just playing Shark and Fournette in the lineup together and not having Minshew, because Leonard Fournette, yes, he's catching 4 or 5, even 6 balls a game. But when he catches 6 balls, it's for like 25 yards. So
Exactly.
your correlation,
you can't pair him with Minshew.
Yeah, your correlation is 1 fantasy point with Minshew. So the fact that you're saying he correlates with him, it's very thin. Sure, he's running a ton of routes, but we haven't seen it translate to any ceiling games in a receiving game like a Christian McCaffrey, like we've seen in the past with Kamara and those types of guys. So yeah, the amount that you get to Fournette probably dictates the amount that you get to the passing game. And for me, it won't be that much. I do think DJ Shark is in an absolutely unreal spot for the guy that he's going to be facing this week and just what the secondary looks like in general. That said, again, like, do you want to play Shark with Fournette? I don't think it's terrible, but it's kind of capping ceiling games for both of them. But there could be a 40-point game where they both do well. So I like those two guys from this game. Dede and Cash seems a little bit better and easier to digest. I would just watch. The only thing for Fournette's reasoning, and it's not too big, but Carlos Dunlap and Carl Lawson, they continue not to practice. If they don't practice, they haven't been playing, but that's obviously an upside as well as guys on the front 7.
All right. Buffalo and Miami. Really exciting game here. Very low total, very uninspiring contest. Actually, the total, it's not the lowest. It's one of the lowest, but the only reason it's not the lowest is because the Bills have a 29-point implied total, 41.5 over under. They're 16.5-point favorites. The Dolphins have a 12.5 implied total. By the way, we talked about it Tuesday. It looks like the Dolphins are willing to trade Kenyon Drake, and there have been offers already available. So, it's a terrible matchup, but you may see Mark Walton getting starts here with how bad Kalen Ballage has been. He is dealing with a thumb injury, though, so keep an eye on that. If it means anything to you, probably not. But in dynasty formats, a free pickup of Mark Walton might not be the craziest idea. But I digress. Let's talk about Buffalo here. I'm not interested in the run game, not if Singletary's back, and I think Frank Gore's price point is a little underwhelming too. Although, if Singletary was out, I would, but I expect Singletary to play, and I just don't really feel like guessing who it's going to be this week. And in the passing game, I like Josh Allen, but I'm not pairing him with multiple guys. I don't see a game stack option here, so I'll probably just limit owners or exposure very low to him, get a little bit with like John Brown, and call it a day on this game. What about you?
Yeah, that's it. I just have Josh Allen written down. Even with the wide spread, we've seen Miami sort of breaking the rule of your quarterback can't have a ceiling game when they're not going to go be in a shootout at all. We've seen quarterbacks left and right go for 25 to 30. So Josh Allen second on the slate in rushing attempts for running backs, ahead of Kyler Murray, getting about 31 rushing yards per game. They design runs around him, especially in the goal line. So yeah, I like Josh Allen. He's fine if you want to pay for him. And I do like John Brown. So we'll see what happens with Xavier Howard. I believe he was a limited participant on Wednesday. But even if Xavier Howard plays, he has the third worst passer rating against him, albeit on a four-game sample for any cornerback that's played at least 100 coverage snaps this year. 14 receptions on 18 targets, 162 yards and 2 touchdowns. So John Brown at his price point, I do like him. Josh Allen, but like you said, if you're somebody who likes a team or game stack, this is a very unappealing game.
All right. Well, that was fast. Atlanta and the LA Rams. This one won't be as quick. So let me, before we start, let you know that you can get 50% off, half off the top of your first month of membership at awesemo.com. Just awesemo.com, all access membership, by the way. It's called Awesemo Plus. Just go to awesemo.com/join and check out what we have to offer there. The promo code, the sign-up code is NFL Strategy. All one word, NFL Strategy. Get you 50% off your first month. You got ownership projections, player projections, the top stack tool, all the NBA content and new tools that we're going to be introducing for the season right around the corner. NHL, PGA, NASCAR, you name it. All of our premium articles, the lineup builder, the fantasy cruncher add-on, and so much more. We also have for $3.95 a week our Express package. And as Spags pointed out on yesterday's show, if you go to awesemo.com and you click you click start membership, there's a question that will ask you what type of player are you, and we try and cater the subscription that you're paying for to the type of player you are, so you're not overwhelmed or underwhelmed with what we have to offer or with what you're paying for. So check it out and use that sign-up code NFL Strategy, all one word, when you do, awesemo.com/join. All right. Atlanta and the Rams, highest total on this slate by a mile, 54.5, 28.8 implied total for the Rams. Second highest now behind the Buffalo Bills, 25.6 for Atlanta, also one of the highest. So both teams here have two of the highest totals on the slate. And I mean, quite frankly, this game is very appealing. It's just a little bit less appealing, well, a lot less appealing for someone like Julio Jones now that the Rams traded for Jalen Ramsey. But starting with the Rams, so I crunched, as I mentioned, and I got really an absurd amount of pass catchers for this Rams team. And, I might look to tweak that a little bit so I don't have a ton of all of them. But right now I have a good amount of everyone that's catching passes from Jared Goff, and also quite a bit of Jared Goff, who, if he doesn't bounce back here, I may forget he ever existed.
Yeah, honestly, I think it's fine. All these wide receivers, I think every single one of them is affordable, and probably some of them too cheap. Cooper Kupp is being the most expensive at 7,400, coming off a bad game where he burned a lot of people, mainly because Jared Goff's poor play. I think it's completely fine at that price point. So yeah, Jared Goff right now is, to me, including Matt Ryan, probably like two of the top QB options on the slate. It's obvious in that game environment that they probably are very attractive for many people. But Jared Goff, I think I like a little bit more. Now, the concern is he's coming on the road and he's been playing terrible. But Atlanta's allowing the most fantasy points to quarterbacks. And you have to imagine that more than anything else, Sean McVay and Jared Goff have been trying to figure it out this week, going into a team that just hasn't been able to stop anybody coming off of what was the worst game in Jared Goff's career. So I do like Goff, and I like every single one of his pass catchers. If I had to rank it, and it's similar to how it usually is for GPPs, I like Kupp, I like Cooks, and then I like Woods. In cashed, I like Kupp, I like Woods, and then Cooks. I think whatever I get of each of them is going to be okay. They all have really favorable matchups, whether it's KZ against Kupp in the slot, whether it's Isaiah Oliver on Brandon Cooks or the outside, or Woods against Kendall Sheffield. Every single one of those receivers has the advantage in that matchup. It's just a matter of, do you get the right one who goes off? And in my opinion, I think Kupp is the best one to get to. Price tag indicates that. And then I just like Cooks, who's not as great on the road in his career, but this matchup and the price point's hard to get away from for me.
Todd Gurley's been entirely touchdown dependent this season, right? His two biggest games came because he had two rushing touchdowns, but he combined for 67 yards in those games, and 20 attempts. Like, even if he plays, I can't tell you that I have a ton of interest in Gurley here. The price is reasonable, though, but I'm just very much focused on the passing game. Maybe you have a different opinion on Todd Gurley.
Yeah, I'm very much focused on the passing game. I do think Atlanta is still very bad against pass-catching running backs, even though the stats don't show it. We saw David Johnson get loose last week while injured. Seems like Todd Gurley is going to play, so any interest in the backups is completely gone now. But just no real interest in Gurley against the front of Atlanta that's just really honestly been very good on the ground against running backs, absorbing really any type of big plays. So no real interest in Gurley. It's all in the passing game, as I think it should be against a pass funnel defense of Atlanta.
What do you make of Julio Jones now that Jalen Ramsey's in town? I tell you what, Sal, this went from a spot where Aqib Talib's out for the year. He hasn't been good anyway. But Marcus Peters, you and I mention it all the time. He's a gambler, right? He takes risks. Sometimes he comes up big. Sometimes he whiffs hard. And those are the type of guys I don't mind covering. But he's still talented, whoever they would have had coming in to replace him. But now you went without both of those guys to Jalen Ramsey, who his back healed up pretty quick, huh? Yeah. I have an inkling that he wasn't in all that bad a shape to begin with. But look, Pro Football Focus doesn't have him shadowing Julio, but I wouldn't be surprised if Julio sees like 75% of his routes run against Jalen Ramsey this week, and that's scary as shit.
Yeah, it's very scary. We'll see. Obviously, just keep an eye on if Ramsey actually suits up. I would expect him to.
I'm almost
Indeed.
certain he will. He's already said he
Yeah,
can't wait to cover Julio Jones. So unless barring
exactly.
like some type of clerical issue, I would think he plays.
Yeah. Yep. So yeah, I think he's going to play. And yeah, for a guy in Julio who the price tag was already outside of maybe some team and game stacks, really tough to want to get to. Now I really don't want to get there. Yeah, if it's not a shadow matchup, it's going to be damn near right next to it. They're not going to be putting Jalen Ramsey on Calvin Ridley. The reason why you trade him in a week where you play maybe the best receiver, one of the best in football in Julio. So it's a really scary spot for Julio, especially at that price point. It was just already unappealing, and this makes it even worse. So can Julio erupt? Honestly, yeah, he's talented, but this is the best cornerback in the league now. Surely he can have a good game, but pay off an $8,000 price tag, I'm not sure. It just gave me a lot more interest in Calvin Ridley. I'll also say that John Johnson, a guy who has been playing poor this year, was playing better last year. They put him on IR. He's one of their safeties. So this whole secondary is just beat up. Although they still get Ramsey, they lose Peters. It's obviously an upgrade there, but no Talib. Now no John Johnson as a safety. It just makes the other side of this game a lot better for Calvin Ridley. Now, I will say Ridley, who benefits a lot from double teams on Julio, you probably don't see too many double teams with Jalen Ramsey sticking on Julio. So it'll be more straight up coverage for most of the game. That said, though, the individual matchup for Calvin Ridley in this game against Troy Hill, who is a journeyman backup cornerback. I'm not sure why he's still in the league, but he's only played on 42 coverage snaps and he's given up 2 catches on 3 targets. So really hard to go off of that. But I think it's a good spot for Ridley. My interest once Ramsey got traded went from, I'll get to some Julio in game stacks and maybe like one of my 3 max, some 20 max. Now I just really like Cooper and I really like Ridley in terms of team stacking this one over paying up for Julio.
Yes, so do I. By the way, and I just saw an article that came out this morning that Jason Kelsey said the Eagles the Eagles GM Howie Roseman did everything he could to get Jalen Ramsey. Whew, that's disappointing.
Oh, damn.
But they
needed it.
The Rams gave up a lot to get him, man. They gave
It was
up
2 firsts and what? 2 firsts and a second
and a fourth.
A fourth, yeah.
That's still a lot of the draft the equity there in 2000 today in draft picks in the first round, man. That's very, very valuable. So yeah, they'll go 5 years without a first round draft pick. Not coming up, but they've already gone 3 years without one. Now they'll go 2 more. It's pretty crazy.
Yeah. I agree. And I mean, props, I guess, to Jacksonville. Like, if you can't keep a player that's good,
absolutely.
The best thing to do is just go get 2 firsts and even a fourth after that. Like, the same exact thing with Khalil Mack. Like, if they don't want to be there, then you might as well get exactly what is top dollar and as much value as possible.
Yep. And if you're the Dolphins and you know you're going to be utter trash, trade some guys away to teams that are looking to win now that are going to severely overpay you. Yeah. And, I think that's what we've seen. So props to all of them for making it work. It's better than having a guy miserable and not getting anything for him. So if you were to rank the pass catchers here, salary included, right? Like based on salary as well. Julio, Hooper, Ridley, Sanu. Would we be putting Ridley first? Because I think with this Ramsey trade, I think I would be.
Yeah, I think Hooper, same price, very attractive as well. But yeah, I think I put Ridley first and then Hooper, which is like the main reason why it's still a little scary. That's no sure thing with Ridley in a one-on-one coverage and a very good matchup still, but it's no sure thing that he absolutely goes off, which makes the game and team stacks a little bit more risky, I guess you can say. But yeah, for me, it would be Ridley, Hooper, then Julio, then Sanu. The one thing I'll say about Sanu, Robbie Coleman in the slot has been good. Sanu has 60 pounds on him in the slot. Like, Sanu is not your typical slot receiver. He's obviously massive. He has 6 inches and 60 pounds on Robbie Coleman in the slot. So we know Sanu doesn't have much of a ceiling, but in terms of getting separation, it shouldn't be much of an issue, but he'll still be the guy that I get to the least just because of that ceiling for tournaments.
How about Devonta Freeman?
Yeah, so Devonta Freeman, the concern for me is, and we saw the last couple of weeks, like he's getting more involvement on the ground, and really his day got paid off from 2 of his 3 catches going for a touchdown. And the price point coming down was the thing that shocked me the most. But the run blocking has just been so bad. It's 3rd worst advantage on this slate for the matchup against the Rams front. Obviously, Aaron Donald up there. So it's tough for me to want to get there. Tough for me to want to correlate it all that much with Ryan Freeman's most success, and really the biggest success has come in the passing game this year. And trying to rely on those types of touchdowns, especially when you get 2 last week, just makes me a little bit uneasy. But I do think the price tag coming down is probably wrong.
Yeah, right now I actually got a little bit of Freeman. I'm okay with it just in a game that we expect to see a lot of scoring. I mean, that's all. If there's going to be a lot of points, I don't mind getting there. If you're running back like a Goff line, I could even see some big game stacks here where it's like Goff, Kupp, and Cooks, and then on the other side, Freeman and Ridley. Like you could definitely see some odd stuff happening in this game. And I'm not opposed to getting this from Freeman.
Yeah.
You know,
And
he's not a top priority of mine, but it does feel like one of these games where more than just a few or more than just one or two players from each side could wind up having pretty big games.
yeah, and if like you'll see the ownership on so many of these guys is up there, like they're all getting ownership. But if you are going to play a 4-man stack, that helps. And honestly, like a 5-man stack is just as viable. So 4 and 5-man game stacks, if you're worried about the ownership and saying, oh, everybody's going to play this team stack, first of all, like relative to the bubble of DFS, nobody's really going to be playing gaming team stacks. But then also if you play a 5-man stack and yeah, you get Ridley and Hooper, and then you run back the other side with Goff, Cooks, and Kupp, something like that, you're going to be very unique. And again, if this game does hit a 60-plus point total and everything goes off, you're going to have probably most of the production in that game.
Yeah, and if you guys are interested in that stuff, check out the Monday show that I do with Manny Laura, where we basically recap everything from the day before and try and provide insight for the following week. But we look at Fantasy Cruncher with the lineup study, and some of the stuff we come across each week is really, really fascinating. And you just brought up a good point. When you actually look at the percentage of rosters, of lineups that had, say, a quarterback, wide receiver, tight end, and opponent stack for each team, most of them are like 1%, or less. It's not a high percentage at all.
Yeah, I did something not with stacks, but I just like tried to prove a point that in NFL you can play chalk because there's so many ways to get different.
Right.
In most weeks, and it's not optimal to do this, but just to kind of prove a point, in most weeks where salary was spread out, so it wasn't like everybody was just so cheap or so expensive, so people couldn't get to them. You had guys in the 4 or 5K range at wide receiver that were very popular. If you play the top 5 owned players within your 6th and 7th guy, you usually get unique in terms of having a very unique build, the only build of its kind. So you can play chalk in the NFL. Again, on average, around the 15 to 17% ownership is what wins tournaments. So that means you'll have a good amount of 20% guys in your lineup, and then a couple of guys who are like 8% owned, maybe only one. So yeah, you can play chalk. It's completely fine.
Yeah, no question, man. And a lot of times people try and go way too contrarian where you may only need one or two guys that aren't ultra chalk,
Yeah.
And you don't need to go super chalky. It's just don't shy away from a good play if it's a good play. And I'll do it sometimes if I think there's somebody that's lesser owned, but in an equally good spot with the same ceiling. That's different than just trying to get different because you're getting different.
Yep.
All right. Tennessee and the Chargers. Here's a spot where I think you could get a little bit different. I do feel like Henry could have a pretty decent game here. Now, it's a low total because anything the Titans play in is a low total. Ryan Tannehill, not Marcus Mariota, will start. Mariota was benched midway through last week's game. Shutout loss to the Denver Broncos in Denver. 40 over under. Tennessee Titans 21-point total, 19 for the Chargers, which is just crazy. How that fall from grace has been significant. 2-point favorites, Tennessee at home. Here's my quick take on Derrick Henry. He is not a guy that you're going to get ultra involved in the passing game. It's just not going to happen, and I understand that. However, he is somebody that could have 25 carries. Game script will, assuming the game script works in his favor. He has 17 red zone looks this season by game. 4-2-1, 4-5-1. Last week, it's hard to even count with how bad they were, but he clearly has a stranglehold on this. For example, and I know, of course, he is a running back, but pass catchers have combined for 11 on the season total. He has 17. Dion Lewis has 4. You get in the red zone, Derrick Henry's going to get as many opportunities as anybody to put that ball in the end zone, which tells you, look, he does have 2 touchdown upside. This is a guy that can come up with big games. He is on pace for 300 plus carries. He will see 20 plus attempts per game when the game script fits. So is the lack of involvement in the passing game a concern? It is. Could Derrick Henry have 150-2 in good spots? He could. And I said to Spags yesterday, if the Chargers couldn't stop Pittsburgh's run game, even though they knew exactly what they were doing coming into that, I think you could see a pretty solid effort from Henry here. What are you doing with Tennessee and the Chargers?
Man, yeah, you hit the nail on the head with all the Henry stuff. All great stuff. I think I think the thing to also bring up is like the context of the slate. If you're going to be picking running backs in that range, for me, it just comes down to, am I picking Derrick Henry or Marlon Mack? Because all the guys around them, they don't catch the ball. You don't feel confident in Wayne Gallman playing or doing anything. Devonta Freeman, I guess, a little bit, but where's the upside compared to Henry? I think it's pretty even there. So it's a spot where if you're paying at that right around 6K price range, it's just Marlon Mack and it's just Derrick Henry, and they kind of grade out the same as not a lot of usage overall in the passing game, but Derrick Henry going to have and has had a lot more red zone usage. And when you factor in that, yeah, now Ryan Tannehill's there, you imagine they try and put it a little bit more in Derrick Henry's belly. And are they still favorites with Tannehill starting?
They're still 2-point favorites.
Yeah. I saw they were 3-point favorites open. So that just shows you how much Mariota means to Vegas. So
they opened at 1 point from what I saw.
Oh, they opened at 1 point?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So, yeah, I think Derrick Henry's fine. For me, like right now, I'm stuck on if I want to play Marlon Mack or Henry, and I think both are in really good spots. Henry's getting a ton of work around the red zone, like you said. Right now, the Chargers are giving up top 10 fantasy points per game to the running back position at 27.2 per game. So, yeah, you hit the nail on the head on most of it. Also, I would say that this becomes a lot better of a matchup for Henry if indeed Melvin Ingram misses, who didn't practice on Wednesday with a hamstring. So he didn't practice with a hamstring. We know how much of a concern that injury can be a little bit and really lingers. So keep an eye on that for sure. It would give him maybe a little bit of a bump over Marlon Mack. I think Marlon Mack has the better matchup, but I think the amount of volume that Henry gets probably is going to be more than Mack. So that's where it sways a little bit.
Yeah, and I should be clear too. Henry's coming in around right now 11% ownership on DraftKings. That's really where I saw myself getting. I don't see myself getting well above the field on Henry if he's going to be around there. I just think he's viable, but I don't see it being a spot where I'm going to plant my flag with Derrick Henry this week. I do think he's a pretty good option though. I'm not targeting the passing game. Are you at all?
For Tennessee in the passing game, no. So I'll just say that when Tannehill came in, he targeted 5 times Corey Davis in a short amount of time. The last target ended up being an interception. It was really nowhere near him, but they counted him as a target. I will say that A.J. Brown in tournaments this week, I might get there. And the reason why is you see his snaps coming up. He took over the wide receiver 2 role over the last 2 weeks over Sharp, and he's likely going to be facing Michael Davis, who's allowed in a very limited sample filling in for the last 2 weeks. He's allowed 6 catches on 8 targets. So if A.J. Brown's going to play more, and we know the upside that he has, there's slight interest there. But yeah, like you said, it's nothing of a priority. I think I'll probably throw A.J. Brown into like 1-3 max lineup as sort of the contrarian piece of that lineup.
What are your thoughts on the Chargers?
Yeah, so the Chargers, even at Melvin Gordon's price tag, I really don't have interest. The offensive line is just so bad. Like Mike Pouncey being out now as of last week was the first game he missed with a neck injury. I know the price tag's really cheap. I know Gordon probably sees maybe closer to 70% of the snaps instead of 60 and a more positive game script this weekend. I'm just not going to be there. And then Eckler, with Hunter Henry coming back to take over more of the middle and short range, with Melvin Gordon obviously coming back to take over his the goal or some of the goal line back, and then also just touches in the backfield. It makes it really hard to feel comfortable paying for Eckler's price tag, where more times than not, you probably see him touch the ball 8 times. And if it's a ceiling game, 12 times as long as Gordon and Hunter Henry are healthy. So the backfield's kind of in a void for me. I do think Hunter Henry is way too cheap. You have this Tennessee team. They're going to grade out as if they're good against tight ends. The only quality tight end they faced is Austin Hooper, 9 catches for 130 yards. Other than that, David Njoku, we can say, is a quality tight end, 4 catches, 37 yards and a touchdown. Eric Ebron and Doyle combined for 50 yards and a touchdown on 5 catches. So it's a team that has been beaten up by quality to good in Hooper's case, tight end. So I do like Hunter Henry at his price point, and he is definitely too cheap. It throws a very big wrench into lineup construction when Hunter Henry is that cheap. And I think that's something we should. What do you think about Hunter Henry's price point relative to like the obviously smash spot for Ingram and those guys, but also $2,500 more?
Yeah, it's a reasonable price point for sure. He's just less trustworthy.
Yeah.
And I'm not even talking about injuries. Yeah, I don't even buy into the whole injury proneness thing. Like, you have bad things happen, and then you see guys like this never suffer a serious injury for the rest of their career. So yeah. I don't really care about that. But look, this is the first season he's playing without Antonio Brown vulturing opportunities in the red zone. And that's a big deal. We haven't seen him healthy enough playing enough snaps to know what we're going to get from him. But I'm a huge Hunter Henry guy. I have him pretty much everywhere in dynasty formats, which been pretty disappointing over the past couple of seasons, but I'm not letting him go anywhere just because I believe in him. And I think he's going to be a red zone beast. And I think Phillip Rivers needs him. 66% of snaps in the first week back, even though there were rumblings that he would be limited. I definitely like him. The question I have, and it's really just rhetorical here because you already touched on a lot of it, like, is it worth the $700 savings on Darren Waller? I don't know. I have Henry right now. Let me tell you how much Henry I got, because when I saw it, I felt okay about it. I got around 10% Henry, and I think I'm fine with coming in around there on him.
Yeah, I think that's right. Like when you compare him to Waller, I prefer Waller. And if you're somebody who like doesn't want to be playing Waller this week for whatever reason, then I think like the main question comes in. You're going to be stuck playing like the Joe Mixons of the world at the running back position if you pay for Evan Ingram, or you can get up at running back to that 7K range where Leonard Fournette is, Chris Carson, some other guys right around David Johnson's price. I think that's when it starts to become sort of a debate around the ownership of it and just a pricing difference. But yeah, compared to Waller, I do prefer Waller. Just his role overall, and especially Henry coming off of a monster game on prime time is going to be higher on than he probably should be. But also the salary takes that into account.
How about Keenan Allen in the passing game?
Yeah, so Keenan Allen in the passing game, I think the price tag is too cheap. And when you face Tennessee, what you want to do is you want to target them in the middle of the field because for the most part, they're going to try and stop you. Similar to the Colts, they don't have nearly as good of coaching to stop you overall from blanket coverage is what they'll run out there. So guys on the outside don't exceed as much. Mike Williams, I love the price tag. I like what he's doing in terms of air yards and all that, but it's just a brutal matchup for limiting the ceilings of wide receivers. So Keenan Allen, I think he's viable in the slot. The only concern is now Hunter Henry's back. Now you're going to have Melvin Gordon back. It's not the ceiling type games of 15 targets for Keenan Allen. It's probably closer to like 8 targets a week for this guy. But that said, he's now sort of priced like that at the 6K range of pricing. So it's a spot that I don't find myself getting to in that range relative to some other wide receivers. And then when it comes to getting to the flex this week, I'm probably getting to more running backs. So it's just kind of an awkward spot that I think I prefer, or I definitely prefer cut more. But then everywhere else in that range, I'm not really trying to get to the 6K range at wide receiver all that much.
Okay. And yes, I meant Antonio Gates, not Antonio Brown, but I think everyone can decipher that for themselves. Seattle, Baltimore, 2 games to go. Right now, the Seattle Seahawks are favored in this game, 49 over under, by the way. That's pretty high. They're 3.5 point favorites, 26.3 implied total, 22.8 for Baltimore. I think this will be a very fun game to watch. Do you agree with the over under? Do you think this is going to be a high scoring affair?
I actually like the under in this game.
So do I.
I mentioned it. This entire game scares me. From Seattle's side, it looks like a good matchup against what has been a beat up secondary, but Jimmy Smith finally started taking part in practice. They just got Marcus Peters, which is definitely an increase and a bump from what they've had. And the last 4 weeks, Marlon Humphrey's been in shadow matchups. And the last 2 weeks, he shadow guys into the slot. Tyler Boyd on 18 of his 23 routes run last week was shadowed into the slot, and he was just held to 3 catches for 10 yards. He did nothing. So Tyler Lockett's ownership, I think this is a spot where, I saw it was high. It was in the 20%. I fully expect Marlon Humphrey to still shadow Tyler Lockett into the slot on the majority of his snaps. So if it's that high, I think there's a very big edge in not wanting to get to that. So as long as it stays where it is and people aren't kind of jumping on the train quick enough. Last week, I got off of a little bit Tyler Boyd after noticing that, but not nearly enough. So what you have here is Russell Wilson, who's been fantastic, maybe the primary MVP candidate, but Lockett potentially going to be locked down in the slot by Marlon Humphrey. No Will Dissly, ruptured the Achilles, he's gone. And then you get DK Metcalf on the outside in a matchup with probably Marcus Peters, but if not, then Jimmy Smith if he comes back. That's their best spot is DK Metcalf, who for the most part has been like a one-trick pony. I think the Seattle offense is outside of Carson, which we'll get to in a second. The passing game, it's a concern for me. And I think Tyler Lockett's ownership right now is miles too high, in my opinion.
Yeah, 23.4%, second highest projected ownership at the wide receiver position. So, that's pretty wild, man. I'm not against what you're saying at all. I will say with Chris Carson, I'm not in love with him this week, but I think you could apply a similar ownership to him as you would to like Derrick Henry. I don't want to say Fournette because Chris Carson is not receiving nearly as many opportunities in the passing game as Fournette. But I mean, look, his touch counts have been pretty wild, Sal. And if that's the case, then, I'm okay with it.
Yeah. So here's the thing with the running back position, and we kind of touched on it, is like there's not much upside, I guess you can say, from guys in the passing game and really the whole mid 5K to the 6K range. Carson's been involved heavily the last couple of weeks. I do believe in this Ravens defensive front. We saw them get just torched by Chubb. They didn't have Williams for that game. And what Cleveland did that game was run a ton of 12 personnel. So it was very easy to pick up chunks on the ground. The Seattle Seahawks can't run 12 personnel. They just don't have the tight ends to even do it now with injuries and trading away Nick Vannett. So Carson, there's some concern there, but when you factor in what his usage is on this team, does have the passing game work kind of last week we saw it coming out a little bit more as he continues to play 80+% of the snaps. I expect that to stay where it has been, maybe 4 receptions around there becomes more of a normal for him, or at least looks. So 6,500, I like it because there's just not much other spots I trust in that range if you're not paying up at running back. Again, this whole offense really does concern me. Carson's one piece that I actually trust of it, but I do think the Ravens' run defense just gets a little bit of slack for that one game. Outside of that one game where we talk about the injuries and the 12 personnel from Cleveland, they're only allowing 3.3 yards per carry to some notable running backs.
All right. Coming up, by the way, NFL showdown slate, Kansas City Chiefs, Denver Broncos, Ben Rasa and Alex Baker. We're going to help you out with your lineups for tonight, so you want to stick around after the show and check that out. Anything? Well, let me ask you this, because we got to get through this and close this one out. Baltimore, do you find yourself targeting anybody here? Is Lamar Jackson on the table for you? I think this is one week where I probably have a lot less of him than I normally would. Marcus Brown still isn't practicing. I don't know. Brown, if he plays, I think I'll have some interest in, but I'm not sure this is a Baltimore team that I'm in love with outside of some Brown exposure just in tournaments if he plays, but even that might be tepid interest.
Yeah, so Lamar scares me because he's facing a team that doesn't have any pass rush once again. The 2 times he's done that, he's ran for over 120 yards last week and then I think week 2. But yeah, you can run him naked, of course, because of his rushing upside. He had like 23 points just on the ground last week.
And there's Andrews, of course, but it's a deep tight end position.
Yeah, it's a deep tight end position. I think if Hollywood Brown's out, my interest in Andrews and where the ownership is coming in, I actually agree with. He is getting just so many errors. And Andrews, whenever I watch like these accelerated clips for like 5 minutes of the games or whatever it is, or 10 minutes, he's just always wide open. Like, I don't know if defenses just lose him because he's on the field only like 40% of the time.
I don't know why they wouldn't double him and do what they've done to Zach Ertz when the Philadelphia Eagles have been without pass catchers, and just really take Ertz out of the game and force balls into the hands of or force passes to Seth Roberts and Willie Snead and Miles Boykin. Seriously.
Yeah. On like a high level looking in, that's exactly what you should do. Because Andrews has been like a legit, like lethal weapon in the middle of the field. Go look at the tape. Like, the man is wide open. I don't know how it happens, but he's just wide open on almost every single play. So there's definitely interest in him. Hollywood Brown, we'll see what happens with the injury. He didn't practice on Wednesday. If he plays, I probably don't even have interest there. Like Shaq Griffin, he's been really good so far this year. Like 2 receptions per game, 25 receiving yards per game, and 1 touchdown allowed all year. Right now, he's only given up 0.6 yards per coverage snap. That's top 4 in the league for guys who have played over 100 coverage snaps, and he's played 46 more than any of the guys above him. He's been very solid through a pretty healthy sample of almost 250 coverage snaps. So, yeah, Shaq Griffin actually scares me. I would expect it to be, if not a shadow, very close to it against Hollywood Brown. So, Lamar, you could always play in any format if you want to pay up for it. This week, I just go elsewhere because I am somebody who does play a lot of team stacks and game stacks, and this isn't a spot that I like for it. So, yeah, this game as a whole, like, at the end of the day, I don't think it hits this over unless something drastic happens. Like, I don't like the matchups individually for Seattle, and I don't like the matchups at all for Baltimore outside of Andrews, but that's not going to propel me to like an over.
All right. Last game here. New Orleans, Chicago. Alvin Kamara. What's going on with him? Is he going to play? He hasn't been practicing. It's a pretty big issue. I'll just, right out of the gate, it's our last game. I'll ask you quickly, does Latavius Murray at this price become a top option for you in a tough matchup at Soldier Field if Kamara's out?
He really doesn't. Like, and I expect
me neither.
I expect Kamara to miss. Like, they signed Zach Zenner as insurance, but like if you feel confident the guy's going to play, you don't do that. And they're saying it's a high ankle paired with the knee injury he's been dealing with. If it's a high ankle, that's like at least 2 weeks, maybe more. So are they downplaying this a lot? I think so. Yeah, I think so.
Practice participation will tell us a lot.
Exactly. Like, he doesn't practice on Wednesday. Like, if this is indeed a high ankle, as a couple of like the professional doctors on Twitter have been saying, You saw it with Saquon. He missed a month, and Saquon's been on the positive side of that return. So this could be very scary. So, I mean, definitely pick up Murray in season longs. But in this spot for Murray, no, not at all. Like the guy, we know his passing involvement's not that great. And he's going to be in that same range where there's a lot of other running backs like Carrion who is just in a better matchup, like Joe Mixon, who's in a better matchup. Even Jacobs, if these Packers receivers out, better matchup. It's just not a spot that I want to target for Chicago coming off of a bye, and we know how good that defensive line is. I mean, Chicago's defensive line, they stonewalled Dalvin Cook. Cook had a good game in the receiving game, but they stonewalled Dalvin Cook on the ground. So, yeah, I mean, people might overreact to it, but Latavius Murray, they properly DraftKings raised the price point for this one, and he's not 3,700 like he was last week, 5,100. I'm not going to have interest.
Yeah, I'm not stoked about that at all. Michael Thomas here, I don't know how much I get to him either because, like I said, there's a lot of other games where I just feel great about the pass catchers. This game in general, maybe I get a little bit of David Montgomery here, who's seen more involvement in close games. I don't know. I just don't love this game. What about you? I'll let you close out the show.
Yeah, I mean, Michael Thomas, I don't want at that price tag, but like relative to how the game actually works out, I don't know where else you go with the ball if Traquan Smith misses again, if Jared Cook hasn't been practicing.
And that's a good point. If it's a volume thing, Michael Thomas will probably get it.
Yeah, if Jared Cook, he didn't practice on Wednesday, so we'll watch that. And Kamara, like I don't expect right now, they don't suit up this weekend, and it's Michael Thomas and Ted Ginn Jr. Yeah, Michael Thomas is probably going to see like 13, 14 targets. So at the price point, it's tough to get there, but I would prefer Michael Thomas to Julio and Hopkins if that indeed happens.
I just have concerns sometimes. Sorry, I don't mean to cut you off again, but sometimes it's like, the targets, yes, but if a team is just completely incapable of moving the football because they're down so many options, doesn't matter when they're going 3 and out on every other drive. So I think you have to weigh the two against each other.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And I think that's very true. So like at the end of the day, probably don't get to Thomas. If those injuries pan out, though, I think I do prefer him to Julio and Hopkins on the top end of it, especially with Adams out. That top end of receivers, for the most part, doesn't look that great. Chicago side of it, it seems like they said cautiously optimistic that Trubisky will play this weekend. I saw full participant Wednesday. I don't know if that was just like something they slated. I don't know if he threw in stuff, but I saw full participant, I think, on RotoWorld. But
who,
this
Trubisky?
Offense, yeah.
Yeah, he's playing. I think he's going to play.
Okay, yeah, that's what they said, optimistic, cautiously. So, yeah, Allen Robinson, he'll face Marshawn Lattimore for like 50% of the game, but Allen Robinson's been pushed into the slot on about 40% of his snaps this year. And I imagine if you're Matt Nagy, you want him in there even more to avoid Lattimore. And PJ Williams has been suspended for 2 games. So Allen Robinson, if you trust Matt Nagy to put him into the slot, which you probably shouldn't, but if you do trust him, it's a really good matchup. Otherwise, not much here. David Montgomery, I agree that the price point's cheap, but this matchup against the Saints, it does scare me. So this game in general, it seems like a wash.
All right. I agree. Well, there it is. Took us a little longer than usual, but I think we got through a lot, man. You're not going to find a better show than this. Give you an hour and 40 minutes of NFL game-by-game breakdowns on a Thursday. Come on. If you agree with us, hit us with a thumbs up, like the video. It does help us out a lot. It's greatly appreciated, and it makes it so we can keep giving free content out here at youtube.com/awesemo. We appreciate all you guys for tuning in, as you always do. We're right now over 500 live viewers, which is pretty cool. And last Tuesday's show did the best numbers with you and I that we've done all season. So the support has been great. And hey, listen, tell your friends about the show. Let them know. Spread the word. It helps us out a lot. We appreciate all of you. Subscribe, hit the notification bell as well. And stick around. Ben Rasa, Awesemo, Alex Baker himself coming up with a full-out live showdown breakdown. And Chris Spags has got his 5-minute or so breakdown. It's not live, but it's perfect for your lunch break, or if you only have a few minutes to squeeze that in and get information on tonight's game as well. So stick around. Showdown breakdown coming up next. Sal, quickly, where do they find you?
Yeah, you can find me right here, wherever it shows it on the screen, at Sal Vetri DFS on Twitter. And then I have a YouTube channel. It's just my name, Sal Vetri. And then on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturday, I'll be here on the Awesemo channel at 11 a.m. And also, actually, starting on next Wednesday, I'll be with Josh on Wednesdays for the NBA strategy show at 9 o'clock in the morning, 9:30, I think. Beautiful, man. We're happy to have you with us, I got to say. Yeah. We'll be back here tomorrow. Manny Laura, Chris Randone, lineup construction. Saturday, we've got the final tune-up with Chris Randone and our boy Sal Vetri. We'll see you guys soon. Thanks for hanging out with us. It's been the NFL Strategy Show presented by Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports.